Cookies.
Apples.
Welcome back to Senate Education 335 on Tuesday, February 7th. Two final items for us to look at today. We have S34. This is Senator Chittenden's bill on kindergarten enrollment age. Senator Chittenden and Beth St. James took us through the bill. Thank you. I will pass out Hayden's and a few copies. Same bill, but have it right in front of them. So, and just to read this statement for those watching, the bill proposes to prohibit a school district from denying kindergarten enrollment to a student who will attain 5 years of age on or before January 1 next, following the beginning of the school year. And I will also hear, I know from others on this topic this week, Senator Chittenden said, he's got some flexibility in his thoughts on what kind of bill he would like, but I know he's looking for guidance. Just doesn't want to run into the same situation he and his wife and daughter ran into, where there was a lot of ambiguity, waited until last minute, then had to hustle and send his kid at the cost of $12,000 to, a private early childhood center, all that kind of stuff. So what can we do for Senator Chittenden? And so to answer that, we have Mr. Fisher and Mr. Case.
Thank you. For the record, Ted Fisher from the Vermont Agency of Education and the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. And I think this is actually my first time appearing formally behind the seat. I'm always in the corner. And I just want to pass the mic to my colleague, Director Chris Case.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Chris Case. I'm the Director of Student Support Services.
A little louder.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Afternoon. Chris Case. I'm the Director of the Student Support Services Division.
So this is also Chris and my first time testifying joint hybrid remote and in person. So we may pass the mic back and forth to each other a little bit here. So I just want to preface, we've introduced two exhibits today. One is the legislative report standardizing the kindergarten entrance age, which Hayden has posted to the committee site. It can also be found on the legislative report site. This was submitted to the committee as required under pursuant to 166, which was one of the miscellaneous ed bills of last year, in December of last year. So I also did ask and follow up because we had heard Senator Chittenden's testimony to this committee saying that he was interested in implementing the recommendations that the agency made in the report I just mentioned. But we were confused because in our reading, and by we, I mean the agency was confused because in our reading of the bill, the language that's currently introduced does not appear to implement the recommendations that we had made during the in our report.
And again, I think I can clarify that for the senator. He came to me and said, hey, should I get this bill perfect and get it all lined up? Should I wait for, all these reports, or should I just get it in? And I said, so we'll just get it in. We'll have a conversation. We'll figure it, looking for some better guidelines.
So he did he did say the same to me. So we're assuming that we're bringing forward what our recommendation is to implement the report in terms of language. I'm not going to go over the testimony entirely and read it. Some of it is a duplicative of the report, but I just wanted to go over very briefly what the request of the agency was in the report, which is to convene a group of stakeholders. So we pulled together members of the representatives for the Vermont NEA, the Principals Association, the School Boards Association, and the Superintendents Association. Met with them in November of last year, talked a little bit about this. We also, as a result of that conversation, realized we needed to do a policy scan. And I think we would have ideally spent a little bit more time doing that, or requested that school districts provide us that information. With the burdens on school districts at this time and under the burden of time, we decided not to do that. So instead what we did was searched school district and supervisory union websites for publicly available policies on kindergarten entrance age. We found 22 of them. We also have pretty much unanimous endorsement or endorsement, maybe the wrong word, unanimous feedback that the common practice in the field, with very few exceptions, is that there's a set kindergarten entrance age of September 1. There are a gamut, and it sounds like perhaps Senator Chittenden ran into this with his district, of policies among some school districts, not all, that allow for a waiver process. And those waiver processes vary. The majority of the policies that we were able to find are just set a blanket date of September 1. And one thing I want to just clarify for the committee, because it was a little difficult for me early on, is that when we talk about students born later in the year, they are by definition younger. So a student born in November joining in kindergarten is going to be younger than students, and they will be, if they're born in November, they'll be joining kindergarten at age 4 at the same time as they might be joining with students who are 5 and potentially age 6, right? So we're just talking about the later the date is in the year, the broader range of students all in the same class, if that makes sense.
Just curious, your comment, I just didn't hear it properly. Waiver, you support the waiver concept or you don't support the waiver concept? I didn't hear.
So we do have a limited recommendation for a waiver that I'll get into in a minute, if you don't mind.
No,
I just want to pass the mic to my colleague, Director Case, to talk a little bit about sort of the developmental implications, which was one of the pieces of feedback that we heard from our group of stakeholders.
So correct me if I'm wrong, unless I read the wrong report. This one says to do nothing.
Correct.
So I don't think Senator Chittenden would fully endorse that. That's my gut.
He completely disagrees with us
Okay.
on that.
Right.
And we are operating under the assumption that the committee will also disagree and wish to include this, which are, so we actually provide 3 recommendations.
Okay.
Maybe we'll just jump back there really quickly and then we can answer some questions about.
And you're referencing your testimony or the report right now?
So in my testimony, I've copied on page 2,
Okay.
we've copied the recommendations from the report. If you look at the report, they are on page 6 and 7 of the report. So our first recommendation is that the General Assembly should take no action. And the reason why is that among all of the needs that we were looking at in the fall of last year, this seems like one that is not low hanging fruit in terms of needs for legislative action. We could not find a single example, we could find one example of a school district that did not use a September 1 cutoff date. That school district used an August 31st cutoff date. So it does not appear to be a problem. It sounds like possibly there is some problems with the waiver process in some school districts. And that was certainly a concern that was mentioned. And I do not want to speak for some of the organizations representing our stakeholder groups. But one of the pieces of feedback that we did here is concern over the question of having a waiver process at all. And I'll get into why we recommend a waiver process in a minute.
So am I accurate, Mr. Fisher, and I'm sorry to interrupt, that there was a date that Senator Chittenden and his family could go by, but
Yes.
they felt as though their daughter was really ready to get started as parents, and you know, and the waiver process that they were looking for didn't work out for them.
That's very possible, not
Okay.
knowing his district or what his district's policy would be.
Okay, so maybe it's the more consistency, like you're saying.
Correct.
with Senator Hashim.
I mean, would it make more sense to focus on the waiver aspect of this instead of changing the cutoff date?
I think that's
that
the
that
direction
seems
we're heading in.
So-
Yeah.
So then let's jump to our second
Senator
recommendation. Oh, sorry, go ahead. No.
I mentioned earlier to Chair Campion, the other piece that is, again, this may be off in the future, but 4-year-olds technically will now potentially be part of the public school system if S56 passes. So that adds a whole other level of
Mhm.
complexity to what we're doing right now. Just wanted to throw that out there.
That's a great point. Thank you for reminding me about that. And that may cause us to postpone or just sort of wait until we see that part of the bill will come to us, the pre-K piece.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Senator Weeks.
sorry, go ahead.
So wouldn't it be appropriate to assume, though, that while we're in this conversation, that the assumption would be that the whole date block would move back a year? I mean, it's kind of the same conversation, but it's just
Could
1 year,
possibly,
12 months.
so like 3 years instead of 4 years kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's my limited.
Maybe, but there's gonna be a lot to that bill, like funding structures will be different and.
So
Right, and also I think part of that is the whole independent part of that, right? Because there's the pre-K, but if you have your child in a early childhood education program right next to your office, and they also offer that one other year, do you want to keep them in the element, just say, hey, no, you've got to go to the elementary school now? Or do you want to keep them that one extra year in the pre-K program kind of next to your office?
I'll just note for the reasons you just
Yeah.
dug into, we avoided talking about pre-K for the purposes of this report and really stuck to the question of kindergarten readiness when it comes to where the cutoff date should be. And one of the things that we did here, so our third recommendation, so first recommendation is take no action. The second option is if you don't agree with recommendation 1 is to standardize the cutoff date of September 1, which is already in common practice. It would have little to no impact either on the education fund when it comes to changing the average daily membership, which is an important consideration if you want to change the date significantly and shift how many students are in the cohort. It's a change for 1 year, but if you decided to change it to January 1, you'd have a bunch of students who would ordinarily be in one class in another class, and that would affect your ADM calculations. We did not look at how it would do that, but just it's a warning there. The last item is the third recommendation is do not take action that effectively lowers the kindergarten entrance age. If you're interested in about sort of those reasons why, I'll pass the mic to my colleague Chris. But generally speaking, there was unanimous thought among our stakeholder colleagues that they did not want to see a broad inclusion of 4-year-olds into kindergarten classrooms. Now, I should note, I don't want to bring pre-K back up again, but the pre-K bill currently under consideration in this body, I can't speak for, I understand that there may be a separate version introduced in the House, that they also set a date of September 1 in statute. I'm forgetting what section it is, but we referenced it before we drafted. So if you jump to the bottom of page 3, we have proposed language here. That language assumes that the second part of our recommendation for the cutoff date of September 1, which is we can see the utility of a 30-day period to allow school districts the flexibility to set a waiver process for any number of potential reasons. Some of it's that it is an artificial cutoff date. So the human example I've just been sort of using in conversation is if you have 2 children who grew up together, play together, have been in class together, are good friends, and they want to go to kindergarten together. One is born on September 1st, and one is born on September 2nd, or within a week or something, very close in age. I mean, you could even have the extreme example of twins born, on either side of midnight or something like that. There's some reasonable opportunity to give school districts the ability to set some flexibility there. And we reference in our draft language that we're proposing to you, the ability for school districts to establish procedures or screening methods that it might deem necessary to determine kindergarten readiness. And that's because when we did the scan of the policies, we did note that many school districts will use kindergarten readiness. We would not suggest that you mandate the use on the last thing. The last thing that we'd want is for them to purchase something, have to purchase something as a result of this that they don't currently use. Okay. So if they have any, whatever their existing processes for determining kindergarten readiness would be something that they could use. And you could probably ask, you could probably write language to that effect, but we would not recommend that you require them to establish a process they don't already do. And that's purely for reasons of capacity.
May I just ask Mr. Case a couple solutions? Mr. Case, could you tell us a little bit about kindergarten in Vermont right now? Half day, full day, mandatory? Just give us a little bit of what's required and what isn't, and then what's out there.
Okay, so mandatory, yes. And I don't know, actually, and I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to give an answer on some of this. The degree to which half day versus full day is represented in the state, like how the numbers break down, but happy to do some research on that and get back to you, unless, Ted, unless you have that information handy, but otherwise I'd have to
Well, my question,
escalate back.
the full day is not mandated. Is that accurate? So you might have a half day, you might have a full day.
There are some that do not provide full day.
Okay,
We're aware of them. I don't know if we have good numbers, but we can pull what we do have.
and just send it to Hayden and I can share with him. So this would, and again, entrance age is 5. Yes,
So I actually meant to bring current law and I did not. So current law says that students who that students must enter kindergarten or actually in the definition of a legal pupil, right? So students may enter kindergarten up until up until January 1 of the school year, of the year they turn 5. So that it provides for this window in statute currently, because the second sentence of that says that they may establish essentially school district may establish a policy, may pick a date within that August 31 to January 1st window. It just so happens that almost every school district in Vermont, at least the ones that we're aware of, have picked September 1, but they could, for example, pick October 1. Now, nationally, we did a national scan in our report as well. Nationally, almost every state sets a date. Most set it between July 1 and October 1 of the year that a student turns 5. So generally speaking, there's a nationwide trend that 5-year-olds are in kindergarten. Now, it might be you have some students who turn 4 if a state sets a little bit later date, but generally speaking, most states set it between sometime early in the summer.
what if you had a kid and you said, hey, we're not gonna put Brian in until he's 6.
I believe that's allowed currently under statute.
What if Brian's 7? I'm just curious, how, if that's,
I'd want to consult and come back to you, but I'm fairly certain that it is a earliest.
that's what I'm looking for. And then on the other end, Chittenden tells me his kids are brilliant. I don't know. If they are, could they enter at 3? Could they enter at 4?
Currently, no.
Okay,
If your school district has a policy under current law, if your school district has a policy that allows for students born before January 1 to go through a waiver process, and not all do,
okay.
then whatever the waiver process set by the district currently is what your process is. So it sounds like, I'm not familiar with Senator Chittendon's situation, but it sounds like there may have been some school district policies do have a kindergarten screening tool that they use. So they have a way to sort of assess kindergarten readiness. Others don't. Others say, if the family requests it up to a certain date, we'll allow it. Or it'll be at the discretion of the principal. Some of these policies are fairly vague, and the majority of the policies we consulted have no waiver process at all. They simply say it's the date.
I mean, the other thing that I'd love to just get rid of is if there's, and this district the best, but if there's 6 seats there and the principal isn't acting, just for whatever reason, the person doesn't want to add additional people or just want to take some of the personality out of it, take some of the, so as much as we can in terms of guidelines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'd be interested. I mean, we can see the utility of a very limited waiver process. You, of course, could, as you do often, give guidelines for what the waiver process might allow for.
Mm-hmm.
We currently, we fall back on our recommendation that there isn't anything broken here from a policy perspective. Understanding that their individual districts may decide something and families may come down on one side or another, but in terms of the legislative charge we were given in preparing the report, there's a de facto standardization of the kindergarten entrance age.
Yeah. So
In the stakeholder list,
Hmm.
parents are missing. I'm
Correct.
curious via PTAs or whatever they're called nowadays. But parent organizations, do you believe that we're missing some of the narrative on why they might want a change of date or more flexibility in waiver?
I don't want to speak for my boss. We have yet to announce we've yet to announce and do the final selection of the Family Engagement Council, which is the group that we solicited applications for in the winter in December.
Okay.
But yes, the agency believes that there could be more done to foster parent voice at the statewide level.
So that's a future initiative, or present's a future.
Certainly, what we did was what was required of us in the way the language was enabled. I think what you have brought up, Senator Weeks, is a good example of how perhaps the Family Engagement Council could be utilized in the future. And I'm not saying give us more legislative reports to do, but if you wanted us to do a report back, that group could be consulted, for example, as part of that work. And that's certainly one of the goals of the group is to try to bring the parents' perspective to the fore.
Thank you. Is this something which we need to touch on for a few minutes? If there's, besides Senator Chittenden, is there a group or
it's a great question. I suspect there might be a bunch of people out there, and I think the point's well taken. If you had PTA members, or how do you gauge what is actually happening out there? So it's a great question. I don't know if you've heard stories or if others, or if this is.
I mean, I shared with you all before that my situation was exactly the opposite of Senator Chittenden's. I'm sorry, Senator Chittenden, if you're watching, but
He is.
his daughter was born, I think, September 2nd.
I think so.
And mine was September 16th. He petitioned to get in his district and was denied. I petitioned and it was fine.
Hmm.
So my daughter was able to go to kindergarten. So I understand his frustration with the whims of each district.
Yeah.
I mean, that is frustrating. But I personally, where I live, I haven't heard that it's a big problem. So, anyway.
Yeah, no, so it's like you just described, the whim of each district, but in his case, and I'm sure in other parents' cases, it costs $12,000 to $14,000 if you can't get in.
I want to, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I need to correct something a moment ago that came up. So I misspoke when you asked about the upper bound age.
Okay.
And I'll double check. And if I'm wrong in what I just said here, I will send you an email and follow up with the committee to confirm. Truancy becomes an issue at age 6. So you do not have a student enrolled in kindergarten at age 5. The student is not considered truant if the student is enrolled at age 6. So, I mean, I think what this is hypothetical. My daughter is 2. So this is still hypothetical for me, but I'm thinking about this as we were preparing for testimonies, we were preparing the report, and her birthday's in November, right? So she will predominantly be age 6 during her period of kindergarten, assuming that you do not drastically change current law.
So she'll start there when she's 5 in kindergarten.
Yes, yeah, but she will be,
Barely.
Right,
she'll
Yeah.
turn 6 in the middle of November,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say again, sorry, Senator Chittenden, but there is a lot of data out there that suggests it's better to be on the older side rather than, there's not a lot of data that suggests it's good to be on the younger side, just generally speaking, broad brushstrokes. There are obviously exceptions to the rule, but yeah, I know, and the VSBA had an opinion on this as well, because we talked about it over the summer, but again, I just think it's all in motion right now because of what we might be doing with pre-K and childcare too. Because that would just change the whole landscape. He wouldn't necessarily have to pay $14,000 to go to a private pre-K.
Yeah, I mean, if you, if you have some of that research, it would be great for you, just so that we have some, so when we're on the floor, if we get any kinds of questions, it would just, anything you have would be great along those lines, would be a big help. I started late. And hey, look at me.
So look at you.
I'm a mess. No. Right. But I think I've heard that like girls can start a little younger. Yeah, so I don't know.
I'll try to find some of that.
Yeah,
I will
yeah.
get some of that.
I know, Director Case, not to put you on the spot, do you have anything you want to add here?
No, I mean, I think that just what we were thinking about, this was largely around developmental readiness. I mean, Ted touched on this in the beginning of his presentation, but the idea that, I mean, we encourage and want all of our teachers to meet kids where they are, but we also think that there's a big difference developmentally between a child that's 4 years and 8 months and one who's 5.5 and starting kindergarten. So I think that we can understand the interest in wanting to standardize an entrance age, or a rather like some kind of a waiver process and a cutoff statewide, but are also trying to think about what makes sense in terms of like a child's development, and I think that is echoing some of the comments that are coming up here. So yeah.
Okay. Anything else at this point? I think a lot of good points. Mr. Fisher, would you be our liaison to Senator Chittenden? This is his priority. Maybe talk to him a little bit about some of the things that you've shared with us, and just so that we don't lose sight of it.
Absolutely.
And we'll come back. I mean, I'm about to sort of just go through some of the things that I've already put in this education bill as a draft. I mean, this could be something that we put in there if the committee's so inclined, just to formalize it or to look at the waiver piece. Could we put in there something that gives districts more guidelines around how to make these decisions? But then that could get into the having to buy the assessment tools, things like that. I mean, yeah. I don't know. Okay. Anything else for Mr. Fisher or Mr. Case? Did you want to say something on this, Bill? And would you introduce yourself?
Hi, Sandra Cameron. I'm the Associate Executive Director with Vermont School Boards Association. So I'll be here testifying on Friday.
Okay, great.
I'm also licensed early childhood special educator. So
Great.
I'll talk to you about assessments, how
Terrific.
we look at development, what assessments we already use that wouldn't require additional purchasing. and
Great.
Also the position of our legislative committee that discussed this.
Great. And if you have anything around what Senator Gulick was mentioning, just
Research.
some research would be, it's good for the committee to have, around, what are some of the most recent science around weighting, around how wave, all that kind of thing. If you have a document, that would be helpful.
There is a lot of research.
I'm
on
sure there's a
that.
lot, yeah.
I would say it's COVID year.
Okay,
All of it will be affected by what our kids in pre-K right now went through their whole life has been in isolation.
yeah,
So we don't know yet what we're going to be facing. I'll talk about all of that.
okay, great, thank you. We'll see you on Friday then.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, good to see you. Marilyn in the waiting room? So, committee, just so you know, as I'm starting to build a miscellaneous education bill, some of the things that I have taken from these conversations, and first let me tell you the process. Once the miscellaneous education bill is built, that's when we would start to take more testimony on it, really trying to understand some of this. But here are some of the themes in it. Let's see, I've got CTE opening up and opportunities for grades 9 through 12. That would be expanding the language in 16 VSA 1541. Staffing compensation for the State Board of Education. Study on discrepancy of course offerings K through 12. Pre-K choice. This was the Northeast Kingdom choice school district. The woman who came to talk to us about the issue of going over the border. I put in there technology grants for teachers and schools, just as again, a placeholder, as we're looking to see what all schools have. If there are schools that are not offering certain things, can we make sure that they have the technology, so kids can take some of these courses online, et cetera, or even maybe hire an additional teacher, pay for an additional teacher if that person isn't in the classroom. So just basically a bunch of studies and things like that. But these are early days, so if there's anything else people are interested in, just let me know.
Can I make an addition to the miscellaneous bill?
Yeah.
I think I had mentioned it briefly, but I had spoken to some librarians down in Brattleboro, and they'd like to start the conversation about having libraries be included as a school zone for the purpose of deterring firearms and drugs being on the property. For example, the Brattleboro Library, the entire top floor is, almost the entire top floor is a kids section. And, if you have somebody walking around with a firearm, it's, around children, it's reasonably so a very tense situation with the kids and library staff. So yeah, just wanted to advocate for that.
Happy to
for
list
all my
it,
constituents.
and happy to have some language drafted. Can you also just check with Sears, if you and Sears can have a conversation also, make sure you're okay with us working on this? Yes, Senator Joy.
How about the notion that our small rural, some of our small rural schools can't take advantage of the farm to school program?
Farm to plate.
Farm to school, yeah.
Great. I think, are they coming tomorrow? It's farm to school?
Oh,
Okay.
good.
So they're spending
Yeah, we
about an
can-
hour in here tomorrow, so we can plan
We
a
can
little bit of
mention
that. Yeah.
Didn't I see something about schools wanting to have a course on how to balance a checkbook? I can't remember the word.
Financial
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 literacy.
literacy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That came up over the weekend with
It did.
me, with some folks who were like, oh, please put
yeah.
that in.
Okay. I'll see if we can develop some language, and this would leave this committee mid-March. So it's, just want to give Beth some more ideas and get some language, and I don't want to do we put 10 bills once on miscellaneous education bill. I'd rather keep it small and tight, but it is what it is. We can always reshuffle and kind of reprioritize and make them different drafts. So, and just about, you're going to do school construction. You're going to give us some language.
I am.
Like, okay, if it's worth it for you, if it makes sense, you don't even, if you want to put it in right now, great. But if you just want Beth to take us through it next week,
Yeah,
just forward it to Hayden and
okay,
say, hey, just so the committee can get a taste and kind of jump in.
okay.
It depends on how you want to handle
I
it.
sent it back to Rebecca Wasserman for some tweaking,
Oh, it's
so I'm
Wasserman,
kind of
yeah.
waiting for it. I can ping her to see what's
Okay.
happening.
And I was
Yeah.
sleeping when you said, when you're telling
Yeah.
what you had on that sheet.
Yeah, no
How
offense taken.
about civics? Is
Yeah,
that in there?
we're gonna continue that. We did have a report on what's happening. I think a report is due back on what's happening in our schools around civic education. Once we get that, I think we should just start to take a more serious look at it. So people don't, I can tell you this part, not that the legislature can do whatever it wants, but people don't like the idea of us requiring it the way we've been talking about requiring it. A lot of people say that it's being met in different classes, social studies, world history, American history. But one of the things that's interesting to me, like this, if we were to build a technology fund where, again, a teacher, this one school needs to have a calculus teacher because kids need that for your math for whatever, get into. Well, let's make sure that school can access the technology, the teacher and have the resources to do it. Seems to me a part-time, one-off teacher is pretty reasonable. But maybe there are ways for us to also facilitate good civic education conversations and teaching examples and curriculum, things like that.
Yeah, to the civics education point, I think, there are some things that are covered in social studies class, but it's different when you're going to the State House or going to town meeting and watching these things unfold. And I think that's one of the best ways to answer the questions of what is town meeting? Why does it happen? What is the State House and what actually happens here? And I think, having it as part of the curriculum to have kids go into these different places to watch and, participate as they can in the process is effective, as is learning about it, in social studies too.
It'll stimulate the desire
Yeah.
for them to know about it.
Yep.
you know.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Generally, the state, and this is one of my struggles, is we don't do curriculum.
Right.
That's local. We do standards, but what we don't do, and I think some of the schools, districts, some of the states that do better than we do, we don't do requirements. Where some states like Massachusetts, New York require certain things. Ours are more, the way I think about it is, New York might say, you have to have 3 years of math to graduate. What we say, and I'm looking to Mr. Fisher, is you have to be able to do X, Y, and Z. However you might get there, that's up to your district, and then the district will do the curriculum. Mr. Fisher.
Record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I'm the agency's director of communications and legislative affairs.
There's got to be an acronym for that.
Yeah, I should have a little card. I think I'd probably violate the open meeting law requirements if I do that. Or to press a little button that you could play. Anyway, so yeah, the way the standard is currently set is in current law, and I'm not going to remember which citation, we can follow up, requires a comprehensive education curriculum or education program that is then what is the EQS, the Education Quality Standards, which is state board regulation. Then underneath that, the state board selects for each subject area a set of curriculum standards. And those are standards of proficiency. So they are not linked to credit hours or the teaching of a course or teaching of a class in 11th grade or unlike other states. And those, then they in recent years, since as long as I've been doing this and beyond, the state board has adopted national standards for proficiency. In past times, it's my understanding that the state board on occasion developed in-house Vermont specific standards. And that was, I think, pre the proficiency model. So those standards are the individual content area standards. So we have a global citizenship and foreign language standards, which is where civics falls, for example. We have a common core standards for English language arts and a range of different standards for all the different areas. And all of the areas that are listed in statute and listed in, I believe listed in statute, they are listed in education quality standards. So the education quality standard says adopt a standard for each of these areas. And so that's sort of where the sort of regulatory funnel goes down. There are some statutory requirements for specific areas. There's a comprehensive health requirement. We are asking the legislature to consider a anti-hate curriculum requirement for this year. So there are requirements for teaching specific things that exist in some parts of statute separate from the education quality standards. But the proficiency-based system is set forth in the education quality standards and then adopted, standard by standard by voting.
We can pull some of this apart.
I'm happy to provide you all the links. I have a sort of set email that I send because we get lots of questions from national reporters and things who want to know, does Vermont teach civics? And the answer is yes. We just don't have a requirement. The same way others.
Thank you. Ms. Cargill,
Good afternoon.
how are you?
I am great. How are all of you?
Great, speaking for everyone. We had a conversation with you last week, trying to get our heads around if we are doing a Come Teach in Vermont campaign. What does it look like for a teacher who would arrive here either from out of state or graduate in state and enter the teaching career? And what does that look like specifically as it relates to some student loan debt relief, some, I would say just the student loan debt relief is a great place to start.
Okay, so when it comes to student loan debt relief, the
Yeah.
federal government has two different programs that help students with any federal debt that they have taken out in the teaching field. So the first one is Federal Teacher Loan Forgiveness Program. This program, once a qualified teacher, and that qualification has to be certified by an administrator at that school, so the superintendent or the principal, has been teaching for 5 years, they can have up to $5,000 in their federal student loans forgiven. If they are teaching in a specific high need area, such as special ed, math, or science, they can receive an additional $12,500 for a total of $17,500 forgiven.
After 5 years.
After 5 years. In addition to that program, teachers, for the most part, are going to qualify for another program the federal government offers called Public Service Loan Forgiveness. This program is broader than just teachers. It's for anyone that's working in a public service position. And at the end of 10 years, any loan that is remaining is forgiven. So students need to make 120 payments, so 12 payments a month for those 10 years. And they have to be enrolled in what is called an income-driven repayment plan. So if you think about a standard loan, when you take a loan out, they divide the amount that you need to repay over a 10-year period. We'll just go with a really simple example. And that's your standard repayment. An income-driven repayment plan actually looks at your income and makes an estimate of a payment based on income and debt. So those programs always are less. If you're in one and you qualify, they're less than the standard payment. So in a course of 10 years under an income-driven repayment plan, you would not repay the entire amount. And so whatever was remaining would be forgiven with public service loan forgiveness. These two programs are stackable. So you can receive the teacher loan forgiveness at 5 years, and then under normal circumstances, you would start a 10-year process to determine if you were eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So those are the two federal programs that exist for teachers.
So we heard from the McClure Foundation earlier today, and they told us in 10 years, we are likely to be short 4,400 nurses roughly. And in 10 years, we're going to be short roughly 8,000 teachers. Carpenters roughly 5,000, and bookkeeping and accounting 5,000. So teachers are really we're going to continue with this struggle. I'm wondering, are we treating isn't the right word, but are we, if you want to be a nurse in Vermont compared to a teacher in Vermont, looking at just these numbers, is the state kicking in state funds right now for nursing? It doesn't sound like we are for teaching, but it sounds like VSAC is going a little bit, giving something to nurses.
That's correct. So the legislature has a program that is a loan forgiveness program. So it functions like a scholarship. And if the nurse works in Vermont for 1 year, for each year that they receive this scholarship, which pays for full tuition, up to the cost of the tuition at the University of Vermont, for each year they work, that year of funding is forgiven. They pay it back with a work obligation. We have that for nurses. We have it for trades. I think you mentioned construction workers. We have a brand new program that does the exact same thing for trades. The National Guard has one. Dentist, primary care physicians has a program, as well as we're just standing up mental health professionals and nurse faculty. So you're right, there are a number of careers in Vermont that have these programs that actually reduce the amount that students need to borrow at the front end of their education versus repaying loans after they've completed their education that do not exist for teachers.
Do we have any that act the way the federal government acts for teachers and public policy people, for nurses also? I'm not sure if I'm asking.
So there are programs that Vermont runs. They're not run by VSAC, but there are programs that have loan repayment that are targeted for nurses. They're run by AHEC. And there is a new program that you started last year that is providing loan forgiveness to encourage recent graduates to stay and work in Vermont. It's not targeted to any particular sector. But those are the programs that I'm familiar with. There's also programs, I think, for some of the other health programs that AHEC runs, but they're definitely health related. They're not for teachers.
Senator Hutchings.
Marilyn, I had some questions here. So how does a student find out about this loan forgiveness program? And, because I'm just thinking of somebody who's, looking at different programs online, trying to figure out how to finance their education. How do they end up learning about this or getting enrolled?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair and good question. So the federal loans are serviced by servicers across the country. VSAC does not do this work. Those servicers are notifying customers and answering questions that are directly asked of them. VSAC will work with anyone who calls us. We can certainly counsel on federal loans, even though we don't actually service that loan, but we can counsel on them. We'll let them know what services are or what options are available to help them with repayment. But it really does depend on the borrower reaching out more than it does on information being sent to the borrower.
So what about the Vermont loan forgiveness program? Is that?
So the Vermont loan forgiveness programs, the programs that we have where we're offering these that work like scholarships, we notify the institutions that run the program. So the nursing programs in Vermont that are at Castleton, UVM, Norwich, they're all aware of the nursing loan forgiveness program, for example. So we go through the schools to help notify students. We also use a very generic, like Front Porch Forum, radio ads, public service announcements, newspapers. We'll use those types of vehicles to get information out about these programs. We have a website that is a workforce development website that has information about these programs. You'll see schools talking about them as well, but those are the outreach, and we'll certainly be working in the high schools, letting the CTE programs and the high school programs know about the forgivable loan options that their students might be interested in.
Thank you.
Senator Williams.
Do we do any of this outside of the state of Vermont to try and attract teachers into the state? Do.
So not for teachers, but for example, the nursing program is not residency based. If you are an out-of-state student interested and willing to work in Vermont upon completion of your licensure, you can apply for the nursing scholarship. That same is true with the trade scholarship. The National Guard program is available to any member of the Vermont National Guard, even if they happen to live in Massachusetts or New York.
Marilyn, would you be willing to talk with our ledge counsel? I'm just going to ask her to draft a paragraph basically that kind of pulls the teachers in with everybody else that you mentioned, just so the committee can consider it.
Happy to do that.
Okay, I'll have her reach out to you.
That would be great.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Cargill? Thank you very much. It was very helpful. Appreciate the follow-up.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, committee, that concludes our work for the day. I'll look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. I'm sorry, Mr. Fisher, do you want to say something?
I really do apologize
No, it's
for the chair's blessing. I just wanted to add one for the record to Fisher. I'm gonna just leave it there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to slightly clarify what we said earlier in terms of the questions. So students must be enrolled in school by the time they turn 6. For most students, this occurs when they're in kindergarten. Kindergarten is not mandatory, but enrollment by 6 is, for many families, it aligns with the requirements. So most students who are joining, if they're enrolling at age 6, they're entering into kindergarten. Because of the way that the years fall.
Yeah.
I wanted to just clarify.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else? You're okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, good.